Hi, and welcome to the Kale Houser Leadership Secrets podcast. Today we are wrapping up our discussion about increasing morale in your workplace. Hello everybody, I'm Kale Houser, and welcome back to the Kale Houser Leadership Secrets podcast. Thank you for joining me for this final installment, at least I think, of the increasing morale in your workplace quick tips, practical tips, and ways that you can do that. Make sure you have your pencil and paper ready. So we've got a last couple, really two items to wrap up our overall list to do that. All right, without further ado. So we talked about the last episode being transparent with your team, and then also having trust and delegating responsibility to those that have earned it and those that you have trained to accept it. The final ones I want to talk about as we go into this building block, this layer cake of various techniques and processes to put in place for your team and your workplace, is providing opportunities and training for those who want to advance in your company. Now, no matter how small you are or how big you are, there should be some pathway of advancement. Models that are basically maybe a two-step model where you've got your basic level, I don't want to say basic level, but your entry-level employee or your frontline employee, and then management, and that's it. Not the greatest model, especially not long-term, because guess what? That person that is your entry level or that frontline worker, they only look to their future as they get to maybe be you, or best case scenario, you open another location and they get to be you, and then they get to handle a bunch of thems, which isn't everybody's favorite thing to do. But in larger corporations, there's certainly, whether it be various different departments or various levels of management, ownership, and responsibility, you need to have an opportunity and a methodology for that of promotion and advancement in your company. Now, if you are on that smaller side and you don't have that, I would really start thinking about how you can change that model, how you can get to the point, because that may be something that you're finding is a huge limiting factor in your company, and why people might be leaving you after a year or two or even less, is because they go, this is great, this is providing me with this skill and this experience, but your company boss, XYZ Industries, there's no future for me here. You're never going to leave because, you're in your 50s and you've got at least, 15 years left of work. So I don't have any hopes of moving into your position, and there doesn't appear to be any other, leadership or higher advancement responsibility opportunities. So why would I stay here once I've kind of realized that this is a quote unquote dead end job? So you want to really think about that and how you can change that aspect of your company if that is the scenario that you're in. But we're going to assume that there is some pathway of advancement, that for people that you've brought on at your entry level, that there is a future for them in their company, that for that right employee that wants to be there, that wants to learn more about that industry, wants to grow and expand their responsibilities and advance, that you've got a process in place for that. And the biggest part of that is, one, right, we just talked about the opportunity to do so, that your structure isn't set up to where, like, hey, I hired you as this entry level, but in order to get to the next level you got to have your doctorate, right? Well, that's not really practical, because unless you're hiring as your entry level people with master's degrees, and I would argue that might not be an entry level type of job, the jump from entry level to doctorate is really too big of a gap to handle for most people, and certainly not one that is handled quickly or cheaply, right? So you got to think into that overall, how these different variables play into this advancement path, so that opportunity portion of it. So the other part of it is the training. Do you offer some sort of in-house training, especially if you are a technical company that is, I think of software company or computer engineering or anything of that nature, where it is constantly evolving and updating and upgrading, and new developments are happening, and new, not discoveries, but new techniques are being developed, and new technology, that you almost need to be in a continual state of learning and on that cutting edge, especially if that's what your company does. So do you have that training available or even mandatory as part of just being in the company? Like, hey, you will do X amount of continuous training. And I had to do that back in the Air Force days. I started out after I commissioned as an acquisition officer, as an engineer, mechanical engineer, but we fell under the acquisition core as far as the overall umbrella under material command. And as an engineer, I had to take continuing education courses, and I had to do so many hours per year in order to keep my certifications or gain certifications, right? So like I was a level 2 program manager and a level 3, science, whatever, little engineering certificate that I had. And they had different ones for risk management or configuration management, like all these different engineering specific type of things that I could take classes for to learn about and become qualified in and certified in. But the point being, you may not have in-house, because that was all essentially in-house government type training that they had developed through the Defense Acquisition University. And you may not be big enough for that. And another industry I think about with this is real estate, right? They have to do so many continuation education credits to keep their license and to keep current, right? Because again, real estate laws change, different contracting laws change, and certainly by state and territory. But if you don't have that in-house type of training, are you offering or at least encouraging that external training that will make them more qualified, make them more appealing for advancement in their company? All right, so again, totally dependent on, and if you're running a restaurant and you're going from that entry-level dishwasher to a busboy to a waiter, there's not necessarily training involved in that or official formal training, but there is informal training. Like, hey, Joe, as a young, you came to us when you were 16 as a dishwasher, as just to earn some part-time income, and now here you've worked with us for a year, you're phenomenal, your attitude's great, I'd love for you to come out and put on a little bit nicer clothes and be a busboy. Here's a little pay bump, and we'll see how you do, interacting and dealing with customers, because inevitably people flag down busboys like, hey, my steak's not cooked right, and they complain, and see how you do with that. And then that next level is, hey man, you're doing great, again, your attitude's phenomenal, we want you to become a waiter, certainly a more opportunity for you to earn more money and be a little bit more flexible in your hours, potentially with tips and all that kind of stuff. And there's a pathway for that, but it's kind of outside of that formal training aspect. But it's not without a training program, right? Certainly in that restaurant, there is this is how we do things as a server in our restaurant. How we greet the customer, how we try to offer upsells between appetizers and desserts and, additions to your steak. Like, oh, would you like a lobster tail with that, right? And all these things that you have in place for your company, and a training program to ensure that your employee core, your customer service interaction people are doing with your clientele. So, and then continuing that model, right? So that waiter to maybe a senior waiter who's in charge of training other people, and then maybe into a bartender who goes even further, and then eventually an assistant manager or a line manager, and then eventually the general manager of the restaurant itself. And if this is part of a larger chain, then that puts you into the bigger pool of, whether it be at Applebee's or Longhorn Steakhouse or, even Ruth's Chris or some of the higher end restaurants that have multiple locations, that now you become nationally known and you can be moved around as, the general manager of that restaurant, right? So they've provided a path and the training to go along with those employees that want to have that type of career in that industry. All right. So then the final, we're going to spend just a little bit of time about this. So the final, what I would consider the creme de la creme, the grand big daddy of how to increase morale in your workplace is the barbecue at your house, is the social gathering that absolutely nobody has to show up to, but everybody shows up to because they want to be there. They want to be part of this group. This is something that certainly you can't start with, or you probably shouldn't start with, because if you don't have any of these previous 9 things in place, more than likely nobody's going to show up. Certainly not on their day off. But if you've been diligent and you've spent the time and the energy and the effort to provide the recognition, get the feedback, do the fun events, connecting with people, certainly being transparent and showing trust, then you have, congratulations, after some time, you've created a culture of high morale. You've created, and you should be seeing this by now. You should be seeing that people are talking to each other more freely. They're interacting. There's more smiles in the workplace, right? There's less complaining. If you have an HR department, their complaints have probably gone way down, things of that nature, and certainly the petty complaints. But the barbecue at your house is, like I said, and it may not be obviously a barbecue. It could be any sort of thing, a holiday party, right? A Christmas party, or a Halloween costume party. Just that large social gathering where you have opened your home as the leader of your organization and invited people over with no obligation to come. Now, just to relate the story, so this is something that my wife and I did, again, going back to when I was a flight commander. I opened our home to our flight. It was during, we all worked a set block. At the time, our shift was, we worked 5 on, 2 off, 5 on, 3 off. So we had a 3-day weekend every other week. So, and it constantly rotated. I went an entire 6 months with never having a Saturday, Sunday off, just because of the way the schedule kind of had been reset and flowed and all that kind of stuff. But the point being, we never had essentially the same 2 days off each week. And my wife and I decided, like, hey, we really care so much about our flights and the members in it. Let's open our home. We'll provide all the stuff. Certainly if people want to bring, side dishes and beers and drinks and all that, they're welcome to do so, but it wasn't expected. It wasn't like, hey, come to my house, but you have to bring the barbecue, right? This was something we felt to do as a service to our flight and to the members that I was in charge of. And again, not knowing if anyone would show up, hoping that they would and kind of expecting that they would because of the things I had done to build a reputation. Like leading up to that, we had done, breakfasts when we were on mid-shift. My wife came in early, like right as we got off shift, and she made pancakes for everybody. And that was just kind of the culture that we were building, that my wife and I were very purposeful about building in our flight. And so when it came time, and this was a good amount of time later that we had this barbecue, it was on all of our days off. And I'll be honest, I'm somewhat proud of the fact that every single person that was in town, that wasn't out of town for some other pre-planned thing, showed up. They showed up with their families. They showed up with their girlfriend, or I don't think there was any boyfriends at the time. And we all had such a great time. I made sure that, because I knew there would be kids coming, and it was summer, so we had water balloons and all kinds of different stuff, so that they could get in trouble, because we had smaller kids at the time. And it was really just a great time. We barely talked about work. We talked about all kinds of other things that were going on. And the overall feeling, at least from my perspective, was everyone had a really good time. It was low threat. There was no expectation of anything other than, hey man, it's a beautiful, Saturday afternoon, whatever the day was. And it was on the weekend because families were there and not working and kids were out of school. But it was just relaxed, and it was a way that we could serve them and show my appreciation as their leader, as their officer in charge, of recognizing their work and how much they contributed and the sacrifices they were making to make our mission happen. And again, this was a culmination of all those previous things. Like, I had already connected with them. I already knew all the names. I knew most of their spouses' names and quite a few of their kids' names. I knew, a lot about their backgrounds just from the hours that we had spent together leading up to this. So, like I said, that's kind of the creme de la creme. Please don't start with that. Please don't, throw down a whole bunch of money. So please don't think that this was something that we just did right off the bat, because it wasn't. It took a lot of effort to get to this point. But the big payoff and the reward is that it worked. We'd built a culture that everyone did show up, and we had a really good time. It was very fulfilling on my part as the leader of this group. And then I hope that those that did show up, and I kind of get the feeling is that they appreciated that, right? So just as I hope you found the value of this, and I hope you get an understanding of how important this is to you. I hope I've done a good job of conveying that, no matter how convoluted my messaging may have been. But really going back to, again, connect personally with the people. Give them that opportunity for feedback as you're doing so. Esteem and recognition, especially on the spot, of people that go above and beyond. Your fun events as a building block, a way to kind of introduce a process of getting people out together outside of work. A free lunch, again, in recognition or in preparation, a way to get people outside of, at their cubicle or whatever the case may be, your environment is. Being always willing to look at your schedule and take inputs of how to do the schedule different, not just a one-time thing, but a continual process, especially as you've gotten new employees in and new team members. And then being transparent overall with your people, both good and bad. There are certainly some things, with transparency that you're just not going to be able to tell people, and, maybe you shouldn't. But there are a lot of things that you can do to help bring people on board and help them feel part of your organization by just sharing information, okay? Maybe they don't need to know the exact amount in the bank account, the company bank account at any given time, right? Maybe that's just for your finance department. But they certainly would probably appreciate knowing that they're doing well, the company's doing well and there's a future. Or if you're struggling and you need help figuring out or finding new income streams, revenue streams, right? So those are all ways that you can kind of include people. And yes, there is risk to that. And that's only for you to decide of how much risk you want to take with sharing and being transparent in that matter. Because honestly, some people could take advantage of it. So that's something, I'm not saying blanket share everything like, oh, here's our checking account number, right? But be selective and be purposeful on what you choose to be transparent with, and do it for a reason. And hopefully that reason is to build trust and build morale in your company. And then, which leads us into trust, and then being able to delegate your responsibility to various team members that have earned that trust, but also on the flip side, not just throwing them into the fire, but providing that training to make sure that they're successful, both for their benefit and for yours as the leader of the company. And then finally, we talked about having that opportunity and training to advance, and then the finale of hey, the big company barbecue or the holiday party, whatever that may be for you and your organization to look like. Is there a method that you can provide this kind of grand gesture of gauging and rewarding the effort and commitment that your team members have given you over the last, whether it be weeks, months, years, whatever the case may be. All right. So yes, so that's my kind of dissertation on morale and how important it is to your corporation in order to build that culture. And again, this all goes back to building a culture. And I'm assuming that you want to build a culture that is positive, that has a lot of buy-in and a lot of trust and a lot of communication in it. And if you can knock out this morale piece, all those things will come into place. I really want to hear your results of this as you've gone through this list of things and implemented them. How have you implemented them? Has it backfired on you? Did you try something and like, whoa, that didn't work? I just had my whole team quit. Or vice versa, you're starting to get real buy-in and people showing up and putting in that extra effort just because they feel a part of your team. Drop me a line, Kale at Kale Houser Leadership. Thank you so much for joining me. I can't tell you how much it means to me. And again, we're going to be having some pretty awesome guest speakers coming up here in the near future. I can't wait for you to hear from them and hear their perspectives on leadership and the things that they've struggled with, things they've seen win, the things they've seen fail. Who knows where it's going to go, but it should be pretty phenomenal either way. All right? So no matter where you are at in the world, hey, have a fantastic afternoon. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.